privately, Democratic donors and office holders and lawmakers have been voicing their concerns about President Biden since Thursday night's debate. Now, some of those are making those concerns public. Michigan Congresswoman Debbie Dingell says one interview isn't going to fix this, adding the campaign needs to listen to us, meaning those on the ground. And Rhode Island Senator Sheldon Whitehouse spoke to a CBS affiliate yesterday.
Your honest reaction to the debate?
I think, like a lot of people, I was pretty horrified. I think people want to make sure that this is a campaign that's ready to go and win, that the president and his team are being candid with us about his condition, that this was a real anomaly and not just the way he is these days.
And joining me now, we're pleased to have Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi join us. Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, for being here today.
Always a pleasure to be with you, Andrea.
So I guess the first question, we understand from our reporting, 4 different sources, that top leaders on the Hill have not yet had a call from the president. Have you spoken to President Biden since the debate?
No, I haven't spoken to him since the debate, but I have spoken to him regularly. And every time he has been on the top of his game in terms of knowing the issues and what is at stake. But we all have been in touch with people close to the president. So it's not a question of not having an opportunity to make our concerns known or have some questions answered. But I think we have to spend a little more time viewing what is at stake in this election. Today is the 60th anniversary of the Civil Rights Act. And what the Republicans are trying to do, the Trumpians and the court, is to undermine our democracy. Their Project 2025 would undo much of what is in the Civil Rights Act. What the court did with Roe v. Wade is very clear to people in terms of liberty and freedom for women. What they did this week was so undermining of the democracy, so dangerous in terms of a particularly dangerous part of it is they said that official acts cannot be used as testimony in unofficial investigations or trials. This is very dangerous. This is the week of the 4th of July. I always like to use temporal markers. Civil Rights Act today, 4th of July this week. A time when our founders, our visionaries had such a vision for the future that was about a democracy, not a king. And what they did this week was to make it an imperial presidency. And the beat goes on with their Project 25. So let's keep an eye on what is at stake and how important this election is. In elections, look, I've had every role. I've been the chair of the Democratic National Convention. I've been the chair of another convention of the delegate selection process. I've been the chair of the California Democratic Party. I know how this all works. And again, we have a great president with a great record. It's up to him as we go forward. But as we go forward, it isn't unusual for people to question strategy, tactics, and the rest in a campaign.
Well, let me dial back for a moment. Given your perspective and many Democrats' perspective of what is at stake, that it's an existential moment for the country, according to your perspective, if Donald Trump is elected. That would posit that you have to have the most important campaign led by the most important nominee. And do you have questions as to whether this was a one bad night or whether there is something more serious involved and whether he needs to be more open about if he does have a medical condition, if he is slipping, everybody knows there's an age issue, and he certainly did the opposite of reassuring people with that high risk, potentially high reward debate plan that they came up with. It backfired.
Well, you asked me to speak from my experience, and my experience with Joe Biden is that in all the legislation that we passed to save the country with the rescue package, money in people's pockets, shots in their arms, children in school, people back to work, with the child tax credit, with the issues that were in the infrastructure bill, rebuilding the infrastructure of America in a very universal way where people can participate in those decisions. These TRIPS and Science Act to make us self-sufficient in the world, the PACT Act to honor the service of our veterans and help those who may have been affected by burn pits. The list goes on, and then the IRA. So we have all these things that he was masterful in helping to orchestrate, to write, and to pass. So he has a vision, he has knowledge, he has judgment, he has a strategic thinking in the rest. He has a bad night. Now, again, I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition? And so when people ask that question, it's completely legitimate of both candidates. Because what we saw on the other side was a lying of Justin. You know, I tore up his speech when he lied to the Congress on every single page of his State of the Union. We should be tearing up what he said the other day because it was a pack of lies. And it's very hard to debate somebody when you have to undo or debunk everything they're saying.
But
again,
arguably,
I think that both candidates owe whatever test you want to put them to in terms of their mental acuity and their health. Both of them.
well, arguably, President Biden should have been prepared for the kinds of lies that he says and that we've also reported that Donald Trump says, and all the fact-checking is that there were at least 30 lies and not answering questions and pivoting back to immigration whenever he could. So there's no question about that. I'm going to,
Yeah, but there's no
let's
fact-checking in
acknowledge that.
real time. There's no
No,
fact-timing in real time. And that's what the problem is.
No
I
argument
myself
there.
would never have gone on a stage with him because that's who he is.
Let me just say, but President Biden should have been prepared for that. Now, we have a little bit of a satellite delay, so I apologize for that, Madam Speaker. But at this point, there's no one who knows the donor community better than you. You're the best. You're a legendary fundraiser. There's no one who knows the convention rules better than you. So I've got to ask you, what are you hearing from your large network of people about whether he is up to it?
I hear mixed. Some people are saying because Donald Trump is such an authoritarian, an autocrat, we have to win this election. This is not a normal election where you want to win. If you don't, you cooperate and do the best you can for the country and hope to win the next time. This is something that is undermining our democracy, and he must be stopped. He cannot be president. So therefore, people are very concerned. So it's split. Some are like, well, how can we subject the process to what might be possible? And others are, Joe's our guy. We love him. We trust him. He has vision, knowledge, judgment, integrity. The other guy has none of the above, and of course, great empathy for the people. So it is. It's going to be up to Joe Biden to do what he thinks is. There is no more patriotic person in our country than the president of this president of the United States. Nobody less than the former president, but Joe Biden. And so I trust his judgment. I think that. Again, I'm not a doctor. I can't say what happens 3-4 years down the road. But I think that in my experience, which is what you asked me, I think that he will continue to be a great president of the United States.
Does he have to show the doubters right now that he can do an interview, he can do a news conference, a town hall meeting, that he has to do something off of the teleprompter? Absolutely,
positively. You're so right. I think my recommendation to is for him to have some interviews with serious journalists, you among them, a serious journalist, no holds barred, any questions fair, and just sit there and be Joe. Show your value, show your knowledge, show your judgment, show your empathy for the American people, and I think that would be a great thing for him. Not one, maybe two, a couple of those. I think that is essential I think it is essential for them to do that. Your suggestion is exactly right.
And are you surprised he hasn't called the leaders?
Or a question. I don't know if it's a suggestion or a question, but in anything,
Yep.
right on point.
Are you a little surprised he hasn't called the leaders to reassure them? Were you?
I have a really good rapport with him. I wasn't expecting a call. I do communicate directly with his folks, and I know that he hears what I have to say. So I'm not. I'm not one of those people over time that always had to say, I have to speak to the president himself, nor do I expect the president to always say, I have to speak to me. His people can speak to my people, and we get the message across. But let us again, in this time of Patriot, 4th of July, it's just my favorite civic holiday of the year. It's so exciting to celebrate what our founders did and what our men and women in uniform have done to protect all of that freedom, as we just observed in the invasion of Normandy. I was there and saw the president speak so brilliantly there. So, and again, about a more perfect union. And let us celebrate the anniversary of the Civil Rights Act, not try to undermine it with their Project 2025, undermining democracy.
Speaker Emerita Nancy Pelosi, a happy July 4th to you and yours, your whole family.
Happy
Thank you very much.
July 4th to you as well. Thank you. Lovely to see you. Thank you.